talk about learning from your competitors, which is a pretty powerful way to get ahead in the App Store and also on Google Play. My name is Ariel, and before I even start talking, I just want to say this is my first pre recorded conference talk. Now, I've given a ton of conference talks before. I've been on stage. I love being on stage. And I have done a lot of videos before, and I do live videos too, but I don't know why. This is weird. That felt like cheating for a while. And eventually, when I came to terms with pre recording, because I think it will be better, I understood the value. And one of the values is I'm actually going to be on Slack right now. So you can ask me questions if something is not clear, or if you have an idea and you want to see if it makes any sense, or if you want me to take a look at your app and tell you what I think. Any of those things are all possible because I'm going to be on Slack while other me is talking. And I'm going to be listening. I'm probably not going to be watching myself. No, the other way around. I'm going to be watching myself. I'm probably not going to be listening because I really can't stand hearing my own voice. But for that, we have captions. I'm going to turn on captions, turned on, and let's get started. So I wanted to have this talk today to talk about competitor intelligence, something that if you know me and if you've talked to me before, you know that I think is kind of the best way to find ideas, figure out if your business idea makes sense, and as you continue with your app, to grow it. Because you can learn so much from what other people are doing as opposed to having to do it on your own. But before we even get into how to do it and what it is and all that, we got to talk about the stark reality of the store. And that's something that I've talked to about pretty much every time I do an iDev talk, is if you build it, they won't come. Because ultimately, there's just so many apps and so many new apps that finding your specific app, whether it's an app or a game or anything else, is extremely difficult. And if half of those apps are trying to compete, they're advertising, they're promoting, they're doing App Store optimization, it's going to be really tough for you unless you do the exact same things. And so if we look at it by the numbers, there are almost 2 million iOS apps in the App Store right now. There are more than 4 million apps on Google Play. And so there's a lot of competition. Now, I'm not using this to say don't go and make apps, because every category is full of apps, but they're not necessarily always good. So just because apps exist there doesn't mean you shouldn't take your idea and make it into reality. I saw someone on Reddit just recently who is trying to build a video management app. And it's a pretty cool concept, but ultimately there's so many other video and photo management apps out there, and Apple has its own and Google has its own. And when you think about it, you're like, why would I want to do this? And it's probably because you have a great idea, and your great idea has not been done before. No one's done it in a way that makes sense. No one's done it in a way that you would do it. And you think, if it's good for me, it's got to be good for someone else. And that's probably true. Could be, maybe. We'll stick with probably for now, because I'm going to give you a way to validate that in just a little bit. So we're thinking about apps. We're thinking about the App Store. We're thinking about how big it is. We're thinking about competition. And why should you listen to me? I think that's kind of a good thing to open up with. So for those of you who don't know me and who haven't been here at iDev, or haven't seen any of my talks before, or haven't read any of my articles, my name is Ariel, and I've been the co-founder and CEO of a company called AppFigures. We have been around for a little more than 12 years now. And in the last 12 years, which is almost the lifespan of the App Store, it's more than Google Play, funnily enough. I have seen a lot of things. I love data. I love numbers. I love App Store optimization. I love marketing. I talk about how to make the most out of your app, not in a technical sense, but from a business sense all the time. I write guides about it, and I do app teardowns, and I talk to developers who do it, and I talk to other experts in the industry, because I think there's just so much that needs to happen in order for an app to succeed. And if you don't do it, you're really doing a disservice to all that code you're writing, on all that design you're spending your time on. And it's such an important part of making an app succeed that you just have to do it. Now, if you are a part of a team, there might be someone else who's responsible for this. Hopefully they're in this talk as well. If you're a sole developer, an indie developer, and it's just your idea and you're going to do it, you have to do all these things. Whether you like it or not, whether you want to or not, you can't just put something on the App Store and it will succeed. Just can't. Those times are over. And that's kind of okay, because that means that everything is stable. That means that business is running the way business should be running. So that's why I know a thing or two about analytics and about App Store optimization. And let's talk about that a little bit more. So what do you do? What do you do in a case where there's all these apps and all these developers and everyone is trying to compete with you? And there are all these users, potential users, who are willing to give you their money and are willing to download your app if they can find you. Then what do you do? Well, you need to get them to find you. I think that's step number one. Not think, I know. And if you have seen any of the stuff that I talk about all the time, that's App Store optimization. Now, there's a bunch of ways that you can get people to see your app. You can pay for ads. You can pay for ads in a variety of places, including the App Store itself through search ads, Apple search ads. I'm not going to talk a lot about that today. I do have a little section about it later, but because mostly that's a huge investment. And especially now with app tracking transparency, Facebook return on investment has become really terrible. So you're going to have to put in a lot of money to get potentially some downloads. The best way to do it? Organic downloads. Organic downloads come from App Store optimization, which come from discovery. If someone finds you in search results, they're going to at least attempt to download your app because that's what they're looking for. So if I'm looking for a calculator and I see an ad on Facebook, that's one thing. But if I'm looking for a calculator and I type that into the App Store, you can be pretty sure that if you're in one of the top results, I'm probably going to try you out, especially now where everything is free and it's so much easier to get things from the App Store. And even if you say, well, not exactly what I was looking for, next. Now, this talk is not actually about App Store optimization. App Store optimization is a whole topic, and I think we have the video from last year from iDev that I think maybe share. And if not, I have a whole bunch of other videos and guides for how to do App Store optimization. But there's one thing that App Store optimization teaches us, and that's the thing that I think is core to really all of this, and that's the iterative mindset. There isn't a definitive set of you do this and you will succeed. There isn't. It's not like coding where you just write a line of code and you know exactly what's going to happen. It's more you write something and you think it's going to work. You set the description of your app to one thing and you hope people understand it. The name of your app to one thing, the screenshots, and we can go on and on and on. I'm mostly focused on the things that can get you more visibility, and that has a lot to do with keywords and what your app's name is like and what your app's subtitle is like. And one of the things with that is, how do you know what's the best? You don't exactly know what the algorithm does. You don't know what Apple is up to. We kind of know. We have a whole bunch of ideas and we think that we know what it does. But ultimately, all these things are so dependent on what you do, what your competitors do, if they're new competitors, if the algorithm changes. And so a lot of it has to come from experimentation. You have to try stuff and see if it works. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, then you have to do it again. And the more you do this, the more you realize that you can actually get to be more successful if you try more things. But the problem about experimenting is that it takes time. It takes time to put something in the App Store and wait 30 days to see what the results are like, and then take another set of keywords, let's say, and try another 30 days, then another set of keywords and another 30 days. And all of a sudden, it's been a year. I'm like, what did I do in the last year? And the answer is I just tried a whole bunch of stuff. Now, after a year of experimenting every month, you're probably going to be the wisest of your competitors, maybe. But it's going to take a year. Who has a year? Who wants to wait a year? Who wants to waste all the downloads that you waste from not getting downloads while you're testing? You see where I'm going with this? It's kind of complicated, unless that's exactly what you want to do. It's slow. It works, but it's slow. It's useful, but it's slow. Instead, there's a better way. You can learn from your competitors. Your competitors can teach you a whole bunch of stuff. If you look at your competitors, you can see what your expectation should be for downloads and for revenue in that industry before you even start building an app. Maybe there isn't a lot of money in the industry you want to break into. Maybe there's so much money that it's so competitive that it's going to cost you a lot of money to acquire users to start using your app. And you can't just guess these sort of things. You can try. But intuition will only take you so far because the App Store doesn't always behave like you would expect. You need to have a lot of experience and to see a lot of things. Now, if you have all those things and you want to guess, go for it. But also be ready to make a mistake, wait 6 months, and then have to do it again. I don't think anyone really wants to do it. So setting a benchmark expectations, that's just the beginning. The other thing you can do is you can learn from all of their experiments. Even if apps don't really experiment for the sake of experimentation, they're still putting keywords in their app's name and the subtitle, and it could be working or not working. If you look at that and you look at enough apps, you'll see what's working and what's not working, and then you can do that for yourself as well. So you see where I'm going with this. The idea that you can experiment doesn't necessarily even have to come from your own experiments. It can come from other data that you see out there, as long as you have that sort of mindset of, I want to see what they do. I want to see what works for them, and I want to see what I'm going to do with my own apps. And so you can do keywords. Another thing you can do is you can learn what your competitors' users want, what they hate about those competitors' apps, what they love, what they need to see. All these questions are questions that can help you improve your product, tie that back to marketing, get more downloads. And ultimately, it's a little thing that I really, really like. But I love seeing what sort of technologies apps use, what sort of SDKs, what sort of APIs. And there's so much you can learn just from knowing these things. If I know, for example, that a competitor of mine is using some sort of non-native framework, like let's say React Native, I know that for them to make a new version or to go across platform is probably easy, but I also know that the experience is going to suffer a little bit. Now, there's a whole debate about non-native versus native and what you can do and what you can't do. I don't want to get into any of that because that's irrelevant for what I'm trying to do here. But if you think about it that way, you will know. And if you can see what sort of analytics SDKs your competitors are using, you'll know how sophisticated they are. If you can see what sort of ad networks they're using, you can know how they monetize. And so you have all these pieces of information that you can use to learn so you don't make mistakes. And it's not making mistakes with using the wrong technologies. It's not making mistakes with building the wrong features. It's not making mistakes with picking the wrong keywords. And it's even not making mistakes in not picking to build an app that probably doesn't have the audience out there. So ultimately, all you're doing by ignoring this data is you're just setting up yourself for maybe success, probably failure. Now, if I was really on stage, I would ask how many of you have guessed and tried to do something and it didn't take off immediately? And I bet you a lot of hands would be up in the air because that's really what it is. If you don't pay attention to all these different things, you're going to end up at a point where you're either too deep in and you can't get out, or that you have to pour more money into something because it needs to continue. Otherwise, it will die. And until it continues, it's not going to give you the return you're looking for. So ultimately, all these things together are kind of problematic. And that's not a situation anyone wants to be in. I don't want to be in that situation. And I've been looking for that data from day one of the App Store. So it's so great. Why do we even have to talk about it? Why not just jump in and go and use it? Why doesn't Apple provide it? I don't know. That's a question I can't really answer. But there are multiple concerns that I have heard from people, from developers, from marketers about why they don't use competitor intelligence. One of them is it's just not accessible. It's prohibitively expensive. And that's probably true. Up until fairly recently, most of the companies that provide this, there aren't many, but our competitors that provide this have catered to the enterprise because they can get a lot of money out of them and they don't care about anyone else. And so either you spend an arm and a leg and a kidney and maybe even a little bit of a nose and an ear to get some information that may help you, but it's probably not worth it. Or you're just going to have to trust your gut and intuition and ask a few friends. Kind of a problem. So we've been around for long enough. And from the get-go, we kind of had this mindset that we want to build a product that isn't specifically for the enterprise. It isn't specifically for big companies. It isn't specifically for companies that make tons of apps. It's none of the above. It's for everyone. It's for indie developers. It's for teams. It's for enterprises. And that's what we've built. And that's why if you look at the kind of users we have all of the above. And one of our core fundamental things that we've always said was we want to make data accessible. And that's why last year we released competitive intelligence for peanuts, for hundreds of dollars as opposed to hundreds of thousands of dollars. Most other companies try to lock you into a very long-term contract. We don't do any of that. You want data for a month, go take it. We don't limit what kind of countries you can access or categories, none of that. And that makes it very, very accessible. And that's what we've seen so far. So many developers have come to us to do the research or for ongoing sort of thing. And it's been really amazing. But we heard a second concern. And the second concern is people are saying, well, if it's inexpensive, then it's probably not great. And when you think about it, a lot of what we do is estimating. We estimate downloads of competitors. We estimate revenue of competitors. We look at all these things and we try to understand how the market works and to take that data and turn it into something useful. We don't use any of the data that we have in our analytics platform. We don't use any data that any developer gives us that uses us to track has in our platform. We would never do that. It's all completely private because we can use estimates. Because our estimates are actually pretty good. So we worked very hard also to make sure that our standard, that our bar is really high. And it took us a long time to do it. If we didn't do that, we would have had this product out years ago, but it would have been terrible. And I would never want to give anyone anything that's terrible. So that's why we don't have it. And that's why it took us a very long time. And only over the last year, we've been rolling this out. And if you've been using it, you know how useful it is. And if you aren't, there's going to be a link. There's probably going to be a discount too at some point later. So stick around. But enough about me. This data is available. That's all I'm trying to say. Less tooting my own horn. This data is accessible should you want to. And if you really want to take a look and use this, it's no longer the kind of problem that you would have by saying, I just can't afford it, because that has been resolved. So let's talk specifically about the 4 things that you can do with competitive intelligence, and the 4 things that I like to do with competitive intelligence for every app that I've ever looked at and wanted to help with marketing. And we'll start with the first one, and that's establishing a benchmark. So before you get into an industry, before you start developing an app, you were probably thinking, is there money in this category? Now, it's possible that you had this thought a while back, and now you have an app already, and that ship has sailed. Or it's possible that you are building an app for the first time, or maybe this is a new app you're building, and you just want to know, should I invest into this idea that I have? By establishing a benchmark, you can actually answer that question with real data, not with guessing. And so let me show you how to do it. I'm going to take, for example, this particular set of apps that I have on my screen, and you can see very, very easily what the trend is. So we can see what revenue is like, and we can see what downloads are like, and we can see that over time, and we can see that by country. Now, why do you need any of these things? One, you want to see revenue over time and downloads over time because you want to see if there's growth in the industry. If there isn't, you might want to question whether you should get into it or not. If there's a lot of money and no growth, that's also another question. It's possible it's just going to these competitors, and it's going to be very difficult to break in. But overall, another thing you need to look at is where are the downloads, and where is this revenue coming from? Because ultimately, that's going to be your market. That's going to be where you market the app, or whether it's App Store optimization or paid ads or Apple search ads, whatever it is, that's going to be how you focus on it. Now, most likely, if you have not looked at your competitor data, you don't know, so you're going to guess. You're going to guess that games are more successful in the US. You're going to guess that one particular set of apps is more successful in some parts, in some countries. And that may be true, but it may not be true. And then if you're thinking about paid ads and the money you spend into App Store optimization, you're just wasting all of it. So ultimately, this can save you a lot of time. In the longer run, if you're working with partners, if you're working with a team, if you're working with investors, that's your way of validating that this idea has something to it, and you can get more people on board to help you and join really the idea behind this, the vision. It also is a way to show investors that there's money and they should give you some of that money so you can get it for them later. But it's also a way to show that once you get to the App Store, to Google Play or both, it's to show if you're doing well. And if your growth is in line with other competitors, at least you know that's happening. If it's not as good, you're not doing all that well. And that's also how you would use it if you already have an app. If your app is already in the store and the ship of decision-making has sailed, not that it's a bad thing. I'm just making it sound like it. I shouldn't. But if that happens, you at least know that you can use this benchmark to see how things change over time. We know that games tend to ebb and flow. We know that business apps tend to ebb and flow. And all these different types of apps have different cyclicality, different seasonality. And if you don't have any access to any information other than your own, you don't really know if the cyclicality and the seasonality of your app is good or bad. You don't know if you had a dip, if it's just because people don't like your app anymore, or because you need to invest more in advertising, or because some of your keywords are no longer working. You just know that you had a dip. By setting a benchmark of competitors or similar apps, now you know that everyone else had a similar dip, even the big apps, even the small apps. So, it's normal. It's like how the industry does what the industry does. It's people want it more, people want it less. It happens. But if that's not the case, you also know that this is something that you can fix. That this is something that you're either doing incorrectly. Like I said, a keyword might have stopped working. Apple changed the algorithm. That happened to so many apps that I've talked to over the last couple of years. And that's kind of a problem because in some cases it can really ruin your downloads. And when that happens, business is no good. I don't think anyone would be happy with that. And so step number one is really only to establish, always, not only, to establish a benchmark. And for that, you can do a few things. Now, if you have apps that are very similar to yours, you can choose them super easy. If you don't, and I have seen situations in which apps that are slightly different than what's available currently are trying to either enter the App Store or thinking about promoting and trying to come up with the kind of numbers that they would need. And what you can do in that case is you can use similar apps. Similar apps meaning apps that have similar functionality, maybe not targeting the same user. So for example, if you are making a caffeine tracker, and maybe 3 or 4 years ago, caffeine trackers were not all that popular in the App Store, meaning they didn't exist, and you're probably going to come up with the first one, you don't really have anything to benchmark to. But if you think about the idea behind what a caffeine tracker is, it's someone who's consuming some sort of liquid wants to track it. A water tracker is really also the same. So you can look at patterns over time. Of course, water and coffee are very different, and the kind of people who would want that is also most likely different. But at least you get some sort of an idea. If you go with no information whatsoever, it's really a guess. Maybe it'll work. Maybe. Maybe it wouldn't. I personally don't love maybes. Maybes are really problematic. And so that's always what I try and do. And if you look at it, we'll get at the end of this, we'll talk about how often you should be looking at this data once you have an app already in the store. But you can look at it again and again and again over time to see how things are changing. The App Store changes dramatically fast, not drastically. It does change drastically too, but for this particular case, it's dramatically fast, and it may not be as visible. And once there's something that's going on, it may just sweep you completely. And like I said, you can lose a half of all your downloads because of an algorithmic change overnight. And you don't really have a way to know if that's everyone or just you. So that was the first one, establishing a benchmark. 2. Another thing that I really like to do, and this is probably the thing I do most, is a similar thing, but for keywords. So we have a tool called Competitor Keywords, and what that does is it uses our database, and we scan millions of keywords across different countries and languages all the time, and it gives you all the keywords that any of the competitors you choose are using at the moment, aka ranked at the moment. And I can talk about this for days. I'm going to try to give you a quick summary, so this doesn't take a week. But the idea here is that you don't have to guess what sort of keywords work. And sometimes even your guesses are not going to be good. I talked to Ian from the BBC. This is an AF chat, which is one of our live sessions that we did a few months ago. And he mentioned that he used this particular tool to see a keyword that a competitor was using that he didn't even think of. And that keyword was gold for them. And they had the performance, they had everything they need to rank. And all he needed to do was just use the keyword and boom, magic. I mean, downloads. That's really what you're looking for. So with the competitor keywords tool, what you would do is very similar. You'd go in, you'd add your app and competitors, or if your app is not out there, a whole bunch of similar apps, and then you will load all those keywords that you could be using. Now, there are a lot of different ways to use this. I'll go over maybe the top 2 because that's really where most of the meat of this is. And that is 1, you can benchmark even with keywords to see who is probably your most active competitor when it comes to App Store optimization. And if you are not doing App Store optimization, you should be. And this is really the easiest way to get into it because you don't have to do anything. It just tells you all the keywords you need to use, and you can easily see that. So you can see quickly who has the best coverage of keywords. You can see quickly who has the most high rank keywords. You can also see who has the most high rank, high popularity keywords, which is really where it's at because we don't care about anything that is unpopular. We want to go after the downloads, and the downloads come with searches. So that's another way in which you can use competitor intelligence to inform your decision making. So in this case, the apps we're looking at, you can quickly see that something is missing. We call that a gap. You can quickly see who's dominating this category, but mostly you can see which keywords make all the sense to use. Now, these could be keywords, again, that you thought of. They may be keywords that you didn't. The bottom line is these are keywords that work, and that's what would make the most sense to go after. So now you can take these keywords, you can bring them and you can analyze them with things like Keyword Inspector and some other tools that we have to understand which one is best for your app. And I have a whole bunch of guides on those too, which I can link to later. And once you have all that information, you don't have to experiment. You don't have to iterate. And when you do, because I don't think you can never stop experimenting, you know that your experiments are a lot more focused. They're a lot more narrow, and they're a lot more, I said focused already, but focused on a specific set of keywords. And that's really what you want. You want to make things better, not to try things from scratch. And this allows you to do that really, really quickly. And this works for different countries, different languages, different apps, different stores. And so if you are doing any sort of App Store optimization and you're not using this, you're really missing out. You're really just spinning your wheel somewhere else. And that's the power of learning from competitors specifically for keywords. Next up, we have one that is, I think, so easy and so intuitive that every product manager, or anyone who has an app, anyone who cares about the functionality of an app should use. And that's reading your competitors' reviews. There's also another side to it that has to do with fraud. We'll get to that in a second. But you can read your competitors' reviews. If you go, you can do this on the App Store directly. You can take your phone out and start reading all the reviews. It's going to be very difficult and tedious, and it's going to take forever. So I would not recommend doing that. But you can read all the reviews in our reviews report, which gives you searching and filtering. And that's really where a lot of this makes sense. So you can do a whole bunch of different things. Thing number one is look for things that users of your competitors really, really hate about the app. Now, I know this sounds counterintuitive. Who cares? You know, your app is so much better anyway, right? You know all these things. But what if you don't? If users hate a competitor's app so much that they're willing to take the time and go into the App Store and leave a review, a negative review, that means that they might be also looking for alternatives. So when they see your app in your screenshots or in your keywords mention something that they really, really hate about the app they use, bingo. And that's not for captions. That's just bingo. Captions continue. So it's really all about knowing what features you need to emphasize and what features, whether you have them or not, you can build them. Go and build them and then use them and then emphasize. So that's really the easiest thing you can do. The second thing you can do is you can look for things that people want from competitors' apps. I do this for our app all the time in our competitors. We don't really have that many, so it's not a lot of reviews to read. But I've done this with so many other developers who have competitors that get hundreds of reviews every week or thousands even of reviews every week. And so you can specifically target keywords in your searches and set up alerts on them, which is, next level competitor intelligence. But we'll leave that for later, or maybe for a different talk. Really what I'm saying is if you understand what their users want, you can build that. And again, you can use that to show off your app when users get to this. And then the next one is you can see what users love. Users who leave 5 or 4-star reviews who just love something about an app. Maybe it's the UX, maybe it's something very specific, maybe it's the price, maybe it's something else. You can learn from that and improve your app. Now, I know you're saying my app is so much better anyway, so I don't need to do any of this. And I believe you. I definitely do. But I think it's better to rely on the information from the market. And that's competitor intelligence here. We want to look at that information and bring that back and turn that into something that makes sense. So see what their users hate, see what their users love, see what their users want. You do those 3 things from reviews, and you have your product roadmap really set for you. You still have to find all the creative stuff that will make it even better, and you have to do it right. But if you had a question about whether you should emphasize one feature over another, whether you should do something first, whether you should do something to begin with. I know when I started doing development way back in the day, I wanted to do everything. I wanted to build every possible feature that every user has ever asked for. And in the beginning, it was kind of possible. When App Figures was really little, I don't know if any of you remember these days, I was able to take almost every feature suggestion and implement it within a day. And that's because there were a lot of features that were really, really easy, low-hanging fruit. And also there weren't a lot of feature suggestions. And also the platform was very tiny. And also Apple didn't have all the things that it has now. And also we didn't have all the products that we had now. So now life is a lot more complicated. When we get a feature suggestion, the question is, how many other people want it? How much time would we need to spend on it? And those decisions are not as easy to make if you want to make them correctly. You can spend your time on every possible feature, but then maybe you're leading your product in the wrong direction. So I don't know if you'd want to do that. Using information from competitors who are serving technically your users. It's the users that didn't find you, the ones that got away. You can learn from them and then bring that back to your app. And lastly, I kind of talked about this before, but it's the tech stack. The tech stack is really cool. It's one of those things that doesn't change too often, so a lot of people just neglect that completely. But there's just so much that you can do by putting side by side the kind of stack that different apps are using. And again, I mentioned the ad networks that apps use to monetize is probably more relevant to games. I mentioned, and you might think, oh, I'll just do Google ads. I want to make the most money. Probably not true. Which one should you use? There are so many ad networks at this point. Well, look at your competitors or look at similar games. So look at games in this category and learn from them. Same thing you can say about analytics. If apps are using sophisticated analytics like Mixpanel and others, the ones you have to pay a pretty penny for, you know that someone is paying attention. You know that someone is improving the experience. Also maybe proving, but that's for a different, no. And that's how you could use this sort of information. But beyond that, you can look at really very many different types of technologies that competitors are using. And it could be native versus non-native, which is probably the thing that I hear about the most, because native has advantages and non-native also has advantages. And if you know what your competitor is capable of, you can easily understand where they're going to go. And so looking at that information, specifically the SDKs and even the APIs that they use from Apple and from Google, will give you an idea of what's going on. But one more thing, not really one more thing, you can also see over time how that evolves. And so one of the trends that we have seen over the last few years is AR, augmented reality, really making its way into a lot of shopping apps. And if you're a shopping app, should you take the time to implement it? I know a lot of apps do it. It doesn't feel right to me yet, but not all apps do it. And so should you take the time to actually do it? If all your competitors have AR, whether it's good or bad is a secondary question. And then you can read reviews to see if people really like it as a feature. But if they all have it, you probably should also have something. It may be better, it may be the same, but you should have something. Now, if you don't know that they have it, you're going to have to wait until either you read all the reviews or you scan their description or someone tells you or you use the app, and you'll eventually get there, maybe. But it will take forever. This cuts through all of that and gives you all that information immediately. And I'm trying to summarize here so I don't take up too much time. And I think I'm already almost over my time, which is very normal for me if you've seen any of my talks. So I'm going to leave it at that. And if you have any questions about specific ways to use this, really throw them into Slack. And I will have ideas. Future me will have ideas to share with you. And that's how I use competitive intelligence, setting up a benchmark for downloads and for revenue, which gives me an idea of what to expect. And then over time, if I'm beating the benchmark or if it's beating me, I then look at keywords, and that I do all the time. Every time that I do ASO, so every time I come up with a new keyword set, I will look at this just to make sure that no one has found a better idea. And if they did, I want to use that too, if it makes sense for me. I read competitors' reviews, and I look at what their users like, hate, want, and need. And then I look at their SDKs and the technologies they use and the APIs they use to understand where their product is going and what sort of competitive level they're at. And all of those together give me an amazing way of understanding what competitors are doing. And it's really, really fast. And it doesn't take weeks. It doesn't take a data science team. It doesn't take understanding R or any of those very complicated things that you've heard of. Now, if you understand all those complicated things, great, but you don't need this for this. This is so simple. Now, I did mention time because another misconception is that analyzing things and Napster optimization and reading all these things takes forever, and I don't have time, and I want to build better apps. You should spend your time building better apps. This doesn't take all that time. If you're going to try and open up the App Store on your phone and read all the reviews of a competitor, that's going to take forever, so don't do that. We have tools. Tools do a much better job in this case, but all this shouldn't take too long. It should really take as much time as you're willing to invest into it. Meaning, if you have an hour a week to improve the business side of your app and get more downloads and try to make more money, great. If you have 1 hour every 2 weeks, that's also okay. If you have 1 hour every month, that's also okay. Maybe almost there. Maybe 2 hours every month is like the minimum. But if you have that time, and I bet you have that time, then this is the way to do it. Now, most of the developers that I talk to, when they ask me how often should I look at competitor data, it's anywhere between a day and a week. I think if you are really, really the kind of person who wants to have hands-on, complete understanding of the heartbeat of the industry, you'll do it every day. Maybe not looking at all these different metrics, but at least following the trend. So following the benchmark. And that's a great way to make sure that you're not being beaten by the benchmark and you're kind of on par. And then if something happens, whether it's an algorithmic change that's ruining your race, or your competitor started an ad campaign, or maybe there's an event that your competitor is taking advantage of and kind of riding the wave and you're not, if you're looking at this every day or every 2 days, you'll really be able to understand that, react to it quickly if it's that kind of thing, and boom, get downloads, which is the goal here, and money. But that's later. So every few days is probably a good starting point. If you can't do that, and that's because maybe your competition is not as active, maybe your industry is not as active, once a week is also fine. Once a week, just to glance at some data, make sure that the numbers still match, make sure that there aren't any new reviews that can be helpful, and if there are, read them. And you can do all that with filters and with searches, so you don't actually have to read all the reviews because that's too much work. And then look at if technologies change, you'll see them because they will be marked as changed or as new. And you can do that kind of easily. So you spend even 30 minutes once a week to look at keywords, look at benchmarks, at trends, and look at some reviews and SDKs. You're done. Now, if something significant happened, then definitely take the time and spend re-optimizing or understanding what happened to cause a spike or to cause a dip. But that's probably not going to happen too much. So if that happens once every few months, great. I mean, it's your business. It's your company. Really, it's the way you make money. And so to do that and to have the visibility into that is priceless, the way I see it. And to me, that's a good process. If you can't do it once a week, do it at least once or twice a month. Once or twice a month, just looking at this data will still give you that sort of idea in your head of where am I, where's the competition, and when you think about things that you can do to promote it, you still have granular enough data to do it with. And that's like the coarse level of granularity that I would do. But anywhere between a day and a month is really the way I would look at it. And that's at a very high level how you can learn from your competitors to get more downloads, more revenue with minimal amount of work. Minimal amount of work doesn't mean that you're not doing enough work. It just means that you're not spending too much effort. You're not wasting, I would say, effort. And you can take all that time and put it into your app or game and make it better. And so it's a win-win, the way I see it. And that's it. That's pretty much my presentation. Now, there are a whole bunch of links that I will drop into Slack for guides and other things that I know people like and have been very useful before. Hopefully you've asked all the questions you want to ask and I answered them already. Future me, answer them already. But if you didn't, you can continue to ask me. I hope this channel is going to be open for a while. If not, you can find me on Twitter. I'll share that on my Slack too, or you can just email me. I send so many emails. If you don't have my email address, you'll find it in Slack as well. And I love to talk to pretty much everyone. So even if you ask me about your app, even if you want to know things that are very specific, I'll probably answer it. And on that happy note, I will say goodbye.